Magandang hapon po, Senator, Congressman, uh, as well as to our colleagues in the executive and our friends in the present coalition. Secretary Rocamora wishes to extend his apologies. There was a sudden cabinet meeting today. So I suppose that's also the reason why Secretary Domingo is not with us today. We've had 2 rounds of meetings already with the present coalition, and we thank them for patiently elaborating with the NAPC family what the objectives of the bill are. It has been said by the Secretary in those meetings that we fully agree with the objectives. It's in the mechanics that we want in terms of the it's in terms of the means that we would like to educate ourselves even further. At the moment, one of the most significant areas of discussions that we're having at the National Anti-Poverty Commission is with regard to the possibility that aside from having a subsector focus, it may also be very important to have a geographic focus. Okay. We will see later on what we mean by that. We will give you a concrete example. However, at the moment, I'd like to share with you certain commitments that we have made to our friends and colleagues in the present coalition for helping push the ideas forward. First, actually, we've already had one meeting with Senator Gingona, and we've started to talk about this bill among other concerns that he has. And we're set to have a staff meeting next week on this and 2 other matters. Second, we are committing to working with your coalition through a mapping of the ecosystem of the social enterprise sector and its economic subsectors. But again, we're interested in understanding also how in particular localities where you have a high concentration of poor households, what our ground troops look like over there. Third, the Secretary has asked me to initiate partnerships in at least 4 areas starting this year, and I'll tell you about one of the areas later on, so that we could start the process of prototyping some of the elements, at least, of a government role of supporting social enterprises. And for the Philippine Development Trust Fund, which is a capacity building fund, a very small fund. Even if it's small, we'd like to be working with the present coalition in defining the specific objectives in the coming year or 2. I'd like now to move on to telling you about that slice in the conceptual space that is related to working with social enterprises. The National Anti-Poverty Commission with the Human Development and Poverty Reduction Cluster has started to take a very focused approach in terms of the geography of poverty. Usually, the NAPC would present a map of poverty together using NSCB data. But on January 3, the President asked us, among the focus municipalities that the Human Development and Poverty Reduction Cluster is working with, which of these have economic potential? Okay. The President is aware that aside from the safety net programs, it is important for us to develop and to widen the pathways out of poverty that are based on the economic inclusion of the poor. No? So the map on the left would give you indications of where the municipalities are that have economic potential. The black and dark green areas are the municipalities that in our econometric estimations The black and dark green areas would be the ones with high trade volumes, meaning that it makes sense for transport uh, companies to invest there. It makes sense for public markets to be set up in there, for Jollibee to set up in those areas, perhaps. And it makes sense for social enterprises to be there instead of being in the blue and dark blue areas, which are the municipalities that relatively have thinner trade, that relatively are farther away from the urban hubs. Okay, we use a gravity model for this. If we zoom in, for instance, and look at Davao Gulf, we'd see that there are blue areas, green areas, and black areas. You have more variety in some other areas, but I'm putting Davao Gulf here for a specific purpose because Davao Gulf will be my example of to illustrate how we're now thinking of working with social enterprises. In this map, you see red dots. If your eyesight is still good, each red dot represents 50 poor households. So you'd have here two kinds of mappings. You have a map of unmet needs of poverty, but the color coding of the municipalities would also give you a map roughly of economic opportunity. Davao Gulf, as an illustration of a geography where we'd like to be working with social enterprises, is an area where 14 out of the 18 municipalities were recently provided with significant support, funding support for the year 2013. This was done through the bottom-up planning and budgeting process for 609 focus municipalities of the Human Development and Poverty Reduction Cluster. May pera po na in-offer para sa mga munisipyo at saka grassroots organizations sa Davao Gulf. They went through consultative exercises to identify projects for poverty reduction, and they submitted these proposals. The smallest amount per municipality was 8 million pesos po, Mr. Speaker. The bigger localities would receive up to 30 million pesos. And civil society organizations would have to sign off on the list of projects for poverty reduction. Now, the unique thing about the Davao Gulf municipalities is that all of these public officials and NGOs and grassroots organizations are quite aware that a main reason for poverty in that area is that the fisheries sector is already, the fisheries are already exhausted in Davao Gulf. But yet, we still saw project proposals that give the impression that people want to fish even more. So people in the Gulf know that there's this overarching challenge. And yet, the poverty reduction proposals that they had, hindi po nakasabit sa sampayan na ito. Sa sampayan that gives you the impression that they're working collectively to address this problem in Davao Gulf. Next slide, please. I'd like to give you a peek now of a brainstorm session that we had at NAPC. So, in Davao Gulf, you had this tragedy of the commons, everyone trying to fish, but still everyone realizing that it doesn't make sense to proceed in this way. They are in a situation where if they cooperate to restrain fishing, after a few years, they will all be better off than they would be without cooperation for restraint. To our mind, this is a payoff matrix for demonstrating that there is a collective action problem. Each municipality working on its own even if it preferred a social outcome where everybody restrains. But each municipality, if it does not coordinate with the others, would pursue a strategy of going in the same direction that ultimately leads to the further degradation of the fisheries sector in Davao Gulf. It would be important, alam naman natin yun sa Tagalog, di ba? Pag sama-sama, may magagawa. Pero pag konti lang yung kasama mo, nandito ka, magre-restrain ka, it won't make a dent on the fisheries sector anyway. So you just end up making your situation worse.